Welcome back, everyone. Pal Ponder on Weather here. We are looking at an impressive satellite picture this morning off the west coast of this powerful storm system ready to make landfall. This will be diving east-southeastward in the coming days, but then there promises to be an even stronger system that trails behind that one heading into Monday. That looks to potentially stall off the west coast, could lead to devastating flooding out there. So I appreciate all my subscribers out there. This channel's up to 237,000 subscribers. I appreciate each and every one of you. I'm here on a daily basis putting out a lot of content to keep you well ahead of the storm. So if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, follow along throughout 2024. And if you are in the market for a weather station, I highly recommend the Tempest from Weatherflow. It's actually the one I personally have had for the last 3 years. The cool thing about it is it's an all-in-one 5-in-1 system. It only takes about 10 minutes to install, and it's all solar. Kind of a set and forget it. They've got a convenient app on your phone. My whole family has it. And then you also have a desktop version. You can be a part of the 65,000 in the Tempest community. If you are interested, I do have a discount code. Follow this link below. Use the code PALWEATHER10 for 10% off and free shipping. I will actually have this link in the description below so you can click on it and order one possibly for yourself. But here's the hazard map for this morning. We've got the powerful storm system that's ready to impact the west coast. This is going to bring some heavier winds on the upwards to 40, 50, upwards to possibly 60-mile-per-hour winds. They've already got flood watches in place across the Bay Area into San Jose and to San Francisco, but they also have newly warmed flood watches down there in Southern California, going inland across the Sierras, heavy snowfall, and then getting into portions of Nevada. That will extend into Utah, and these will likely going to be extended into Colorado as this system will be making landfall. And here's the water vapor this morning. So you've got two things to look for. So you've got a lot of dry air across the middle of the country. You've got a lot of warm temperatures, almost like April-like temperatures out there. We are expecting some water vapor to come back across the middle of the country. Now, this is not going to be allowed to fall to the surface as of yet. A lot of dry air, so it's going to fight that dry air. We always look at the atmosphere from the top down. So this is starting to be moistening up those layers of the atmosphere, while most of this precipitation off the west coast will be reaching the ground. That's why this air mass is actually completely saturated. All of this will be reaching the ground in the form of heavy precipitation along the coastal areas. And then where you get into the higher elevations, we're talking some of that heavier snows start to fall. So if we look at the surface map and kind of see how this is going to play out, starting going into today, going into that tomorrow timeframe on Thursday, we've got the heavier rains. It's really going to be originating in Oregon, going into Northern California, but eventually by the time we get into later tonight into tomorrow, they're going to be inundating those areas into Southern California, impacting those areas in Nevada. Higher elevations will start to transfer over to some of that snow, eventually heading into Utah and getting into the Flagstaff regions. And kind of the big picture looks like this. We've got this ridge of high pressure. This is what's bringing all the nicer, warmer conditions after that big freeze we've had for the last 2 weeks. But underneath that, we do see that Pacific jet really active. We've got the atmospheric rivers to play. We've got 2 of them. The first one's making a shore. That's going to bring some cooler anomalies, but this is also going to be diving southeastward, kind of away from that ridging, and put all the instability across the southwest, through Texas, through the southern plains, and into the southeast into the coming days. So that's what we're going to be looking for with these storm tracks. And here's some of the winds it's going to bring along with it too. So like I mentioned with that first system, you see how dynamic it is. Some of those wind gusts could easily be approaching 40, 50, upwards to possibly 60 miles per hour for the next 2 days as this system will be traversing from north to south and eventually head inland, going into that Friday time frame. And as we get into that Friday time frame, Friday night into Saturday time frame, it is going to be cold enough by then to be all snow again back into Idaho, into Wyoming, back into Utah, and yes, back into those areas into Colorado, and eventually heading into Colorado Springs into the Denver region, where it's just going to be all rain on the leading edge back into Kansas, into the Oklahoma region, into north, central, southeast, and eastern portions of Texas. Likely starts into maybe the Friday afternoon, heading into the overnight, and going into that morning midday time frame on Saturday. So by the time you head into Sunday, it should be out of those regions, and now the heavier precipitation is more or less locked under portions of Arkansas, into Louisiana, into Mississippi, and getting into portions of the Florida Panhandle. You can see where the ridging is, right? That's where the ridge is in place. Plenty of warmer conditions. All the instability travels away from that ridge, and that's exactly what's going to happen as we head into that Sunday time frame. And going into that Monday time frame, there's the low pressure. So it's pretty evident you've got the low pressure kind of stalling out there into the southeast. Adds more heavy rain, more heavier precipitation. So you've got another 2 to 3 inch swath of heavier precipitation across this region. But yes, all eyes on Monday will be traversing across the West Coast again, as this looks to be even stronger than what's going to come ashore today. And that is going to be concerning, not only just for California, but especially into Southern California, because the problem with this system, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. So you've got two prongs. You've got the first system going to be sitting and spinning by the time we head into that Monday time frame out in the southeast, still dealing with those higher winds, still dealing with those areas of instability and some of those heavier rain showers back into Florida and portions of the Carolinas into Georgia. But it's this second system, this low pressure center, sets up around Northern California off the coast, but it's underneath where they pull in those higher wind gusts, that very heavy extreme amount of moisture content from that second atmospheric river event. And this low pressure center stalls. That is the concern with this system, because it doesn't go anywhere. And you're talking about, during this time frame, the first couple of days of February, yeah, almost off the charts. You get 2, 3, 4, almost 500% above average precipitation that what you would typically see this time of year. And then yes, the concerning factor is it's not progressive. It literally stalls in that same area, pumping in that moisture. So here's the setup on Tuesday. In fact, it only actually deepens. The low doesn't go anywhere. It just actually is able to intensify the longer it sits out in the open waters, and that just pulls in all the heavier rains, all the higher winds. We're talking 100% flash flood, warnings out here. We're probably going to talk about numerous flood watches, flood warnings, and it could lead to, devastating flooding potentially, because it's a compounding effect. It's all the rain you've recently had, and then all the rain that's coming for the initial swath this week. And then next week, you've got about 4 congruent days in a row there from Monday to Thursday time frame, where that low just kind of sits and spins and just pulls in just a abundance amount of moisture across the same areas. And there's Wednesday, right? The low is still kind of sitting out there, still pulling in all that heavier rain. Eventually, some of that colder air, like we talked about in Alaska, is finally going to start losing its grip. And we talked about in my February forecast, it was going to be a slow process, and it definitely has been. It's a gradual process, but eventually some of that colder air will start to impact those western regions and slowly migrate from west to east as we get into that second week of February, and especially by the time we head into that middle of the month of February. But before then, there is the system by Thursday, right? You see it. I mean, you saw where it was Monday, like right here. It doesn't really go anywhere over 4 days, folks. So what do you think is going to happen when you got a low pressure center just pulling in copious amounts of moisture and dumping it inland on the same areas? Higher winds, you've got landslide potentials, mudslide potentials, and then also all the heavier rains, which causes flooding concerns across Southern California, as this storm system will be finally trying to move ashore, but it might not be until that Friday or Saturday timeframe. But eventually, like I mentioned in my February update, yeah, the colder air will eventually win because the ridging is going to come back over Alaska. That's going to allow to finally release, kind of break the dam, if you will, under that colder air that's coming in, been locked up there in Canada, pulling southbound, and you should start to see more cooler anomalies, colder anomalies start to unfold across the west and eventually heading into those central US. And eventually, by the time we head into the middle of the month of February, yes, most, if not almost all, the lower 48 will finally be into that colder air. So definitely enjoy the nicer weather. Winter's definitely not over, folks. We've got what they call a January thaw, and typically kind of happens every year. You get that kind of fall spring, but then, yeah, winter comes back, and it will be starting to come back by the time we head into that second full week of February, but especially for most of the US by the time we head into mid-February. And what's going to happen, just like what we saw in January, is going to have these systems, again, a step down approach, right? Every one of these systems potentially gets a little bit lower and lower in the jet stream as these will be traversing across from west to east. But this is the concern of all the heavier rains over the next 7 to 10 days. We're going to zoom into Northern California, those places in Eureka, into Fort Bragg, back into Redding, into the Bay Area, into San Francisco, into San Jose. Yeah, Sacramento, easily 3, 6, if not more inches of rainfall. That's just Northern California, right? But look at what happens with Southern California. Some of these global models is printing out not a pretty picture, folks. I mean, yes, remember all the rain we've had over across this region? Remember what happened in San Diego with just 3 inches of rainfall in one day? Yeah, devastating flooding. So when you start looking at these numbers and saying, hey, we could potentially look at 8 inches in San Diego, potentially 10 inches, if not almost a foot of rain in Los Angeles, that's concerning, especially when you look at some of these annual averages. Only averages about 12 inches for the entire year in Los Angeles. So if you can get 10 inches over a 7 to 10 day period, that's not a good sign, folks. That's almost your annual rainfall just over a 10-day slot, and that's not going to lead to pretty scenarios. So take this seriously. I mean, heat is the #1 rated casualty event, weather-related event, but flooding is #2 because it can sweep you off your feet. Water travels at 6 to 12 miles an hour. Definitely take you under your feet. It only takes about 6 inches to elevate your car and hydroplane your car and take it downstream as well. So it's not going to take much in some of these areas that are not just used to this very intense heavy rainfall. So yes, I am getting concerned about devastating flooding entering California, especially starting this week, but going into next week is definitely more concerning with that southern tier for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, leading into Thursday of next week. So if we zoom out for the rest of the country, this is kind of what it looks like. We've got all the instability. Really, the two main players are these two atmospheric river events are going to be coming. One of them is making landfall today, and the second one's going to be making landfall on Monday, or start to impact ports on Monday. So you got all this heavier rain entering the west coast, going into the interior regions, diving east southeastward. Look at where the dry slot is, where that ridging is, right? So it all traverses across this same path, goes through Colorado, goes through Kansas, through Oklahoma, through Texas, mainly the north, central, and eastern 2/3 of Texas, but especially into Arkansas and Louisiana, and back into the southeast here, and back into that Florida region. And where it's going to be cold enough, it will be snowing heavily too. So we've got a lot of heavy snow for the Sierras, for the Cascades, for those intermountain regions, for Nevada, back into Flagstaff, into San Jose, back into portions of New Mexico. Look at Colorado, folks. Some of those higher elevations in the mountain regions, 2 to 3 feet, not out of the question. Definitely lighter once you get into Denver and Colorado Springs, but I'm still looking at possibly 6 inches, maybe 8 inches in Colorado Springs region. But yeah, very heavy snow. Notice the drier slot under that ridging. But yes, once we get past that 10th time frame, we're going to have that colder air kind of releasing from the west and eventually heading into the central US. And eventually by mid-month of February, it will be kind of taking over the lower 48, kind of like what you saw in the month of January. Started warm and then it trended much colder as we got towards the middle of the month. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch the next update while I protect you for and after storm.